The air in the grand ballroom, thick with the scent of money and expensive perfume, suddenly felt thin, impossible to breathe. Every eye, hundreds of them, sharp as glass shards, was fixed on her. On stage, Cassandra Beaumont, a vision in crimson silk, held the microphone like a weapon. Her voice, amplified to fill every corner, dripped with saccharine poison. While the decor is quaint, she purred, a small smirk playing on her lips. One does wonder if the Starlight Gala has lowered its standards, hiring some unknown small-time florist. The words echoed a public execution of a dream, and in the crowd Leona Ashworth, the nobody florist, felt the floor drop away, her heart plummeting into the abyss. She was invisible until she wasn't. Until the man who broke her heart, Stephen Baker, began to walk toward the stage, his face a mask of thunder. 2 years. It had been 730 days since Leona Ashworth had last worn a dress that cost more than her monthly groceries. 730 days since the name Baker was a shield rather than a scar. Now standing in the back service corridor of the opulent Waldorf Astoria Grand Ballroom, she was just Leona. Proprietor, designer, and sole employee of Acanthus Designs, a floral business she'd built from the dirt up, quite literally. The air inside the ballroom was a symphony of competing scents, roasted duck vintage champagne, and the cloying sweetness of a dozen different perfumes. But beneath it all, Leona could smell her own work. The clean green scent of eucalyptus, the spicy perfume of stargazer lilies, and the delicate, almost ghostly fragrance of the ghost orchids she'd painstakingly sourced for the centerpieces. They were her pride, her signature, a whisper of the artist she used to be. Her life now was a quiet rhythm of dawn trips to the flower market soil under her fingernails and the simple satisfaction of coaxing beauty from bare stems. She lived in a small walk-up in Queens, a world away from the Park Avenue penthouse she'd once shared with Stephen Baker. The divorce had been swift and brutal. His lawyers had called it irreconcilable differences. Leona called it a complete system failure. Stephen, the boy she'd met in a college library, had become a man consumed by his empire Baker innovations. He was a titan of industry, a genius in logistics and AI, but somewhere along the way he had logged out of their marriage. The final months had been a blur of missed dinners, canceled vacations, and a chilling, emotional distance. He was there, but he wasn't. The final blow came not as a thunderous fight, but a quiet, sterile meeting in his lawyer's office. He'd looked at her with the same dispassionate analysis he gave his quarterly reports, his eyes revealing nothing. He believed she had been unfaithful, a poisonous lie whispered into his ear by a trusted source he refused to name. The accusation was so ludicrous, so contrary to the very fabric of her being, that she had been too stunned to fight. Her quiet platonic friendship with her elderly mentor, a retired botanist named Mr. O'Connell, had been twisted into something sordid. Stephen, the man who once claimed to know her soul, had believed the lie without question. So she'd walked away with a modest settlement and a shattered heart, refusing to take a penny more than what she needed to start over. Tonight was supposed to be a turning point. Landing the Starlight Charity Gala was a coup, a career-defining moment. It was her chance to put Acanthus Designs on the map, to prove that Leona Ashworth was not just a billionaire's forgotten ex-wife. She had poured every ounce of her talent and every dollar of her shoestring budget into this event. Each arrangement was a piece of her soul, crafted to evoke a sense of wild, untamed elegance amidst the city's rigid glamour. A frantic event coordinator, a woman named Beverly with a clipboard clutched to her chest, rushed past. "Leona, table 17's centerpiece is looking a little limp. Can you fix it now?" "On it," Leona said, her voice calm despite the frantic energy around her. She smoothed down her simple black dress, elegant, professional, and designed to make her invisible. She grabbed her kit and slipped through a service door into the main ballroom. The scale of it still took her breath away. Chandeliers dripped crystals like frozen waterfalls. The city's elite, a flock of brilliantly plumed birds, mingled and laughed, their jewelry catching the light. It was a world she had once belonged to, a gilded cage she didn't miss. But seeing it now as an outsider, a worker, stung in a way she hadn't anticipated. She found table 17, her eyes scanning the room out of a morbid, self-destructive habit. And then she saw him. Stephen Baker stood near the main stage, looking impossibly handsome in a bespoke tuxedo. He hadn't aged a day. If anything, the weight of his empire had only sharpened his features, carving his jawline and adding a serious intensity to his gray eyes. But it wasn't just him. Hanging on his arm, draped in a backless crimson gown that seemed painted onto her skin, was Cassandra Beaumont. Cassandra, the lifestyle guru, social media magnate, and the woman whose perfectly curated life was the envy of millions. Leona had met her a few times during the marriage. She was a friend of a friend, always circling on the periphery, her compliments too sweet, her eyes too sharp. Leona knew with a sick certainty that settled deep in her gut that Cassandra was the unnamed source. She was the one who had planted the seed of doubt in Stephen's mind. Seeing them together felt like a physical blow. The air rushed from her lungs. Cassandra leaned in to whisper something in Stephen's ear, her red lacquered nails trailing down his lapel. He gave a tight, distracted nod, his gaze sweeping the room with a familiar, restless energy. For a horrifying second his eyes met Leona's. There was no recognition. To him she was just another part of the scenery, a woman in black tending to the flowers. A nobody. The invisibility she had cultivated as a shield suddenly felt like a shroud. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted a fern, the delicate frond a stark contrast to the iron grip of pain around her heart. She had to get through this night. She would fix the flowers, collect her check, and disappear back into her quiet life, where the name Baker was nothing but a ghost. Leona forced herself to focus on the task at hand. The lily at table 17 was indeed drooping, likely from a pocket of warm air near a serving station. With the practiced hands of a surgeon, she spritzed its petals with cool water and adjusted its stem in the floral foam, coaxing it back to life. Her movements were small and precise, designed to draw no attention. Around her, the drone of conversation was a constant hum, punctuated by bursts of laughter and the clinking of glasses. "Stephen, darling, you haven't heard a word I've said." Cassandra's voice, sharp and melodious, cut through the noise. They were closer now, standing just a few feet away. Leona froze her back to them, pretending to be utterly absorbed in the placement of a single baby's breath. "I was listening." Stephen's voice was a low rumble, the sound that used to soothe her to sleep. Now it sent a jolt of unwelcome electricity down her spine. "You were talking about the Cotillard auction in Monaco." "Exactly. We simply must go. My brand needs the European exposure. And that dreadful Brenda Langford will be there. I'd love to see the look on her face when we outbid her for the Degas." "Fine, Cass. We'll go," he said, his tone flat dismissive. Leona risked a glance over her shoulder. Stephen's face was a study in bored discontent. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, his eyes scanning the room not with interest but with the weary look of a king surveying a kingdom that no longer thrilled him. His gaze passed over the floral arrangements, lingering for a fraction of a second longer than it did on the guests. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his features before he looked away. Did he recognize her work? It was a foolish thought. He had never paid much attention to her hobby, as he gently called it. To him, her passion for botany and design was a quaint pastime, something to fill her days while he was out conquering the world. He wouldn't know her floral signature from a grocery store bouquet. "The arrangements are interesting, aren't they?" Cassandra commented, her eyes sweeping over the centerpiece on their table. "A bit. Wild. Almost weedy. I much prefer a classic rose ball. So much more elegant." Leona's fingers tightened on her clippers. Weedy. She had spent weeks designing these pieces to feel organic and breathtaking, a slice of an enchanted forest in the heart of the city. To have them dismissed so casually by this woman felt like a personal insult. Beverly, the coordinator, suddenly appeared at Stephen's side. "Mr. Baker, Ms. Beaumont, thank you so much again for your generous donation. Ms. Beaumont, we're ready for you to say a few words on stage in about 5 minutes just before the main auction begins." "Of course." Cassandra beamed, her public persona snapping into place like a mask. "I'd be delighted." As Beverly scurried away, Cassandra turned to Stephen, a possessive hand on his chest. "Wish me luck, darling." She gave him a theatrical kiss that was all for show, then glided toward the stage, a crimson shark navigating the shallow waters of high society. Stephen watched her go, his expression unreadable. He took a sip of his drink, and his gaze began to wander again. This time it settled directly on the centerpiece in front of him. He leaned closer, his brow furrowed in concentration. He gently touched a petal of the ghost orchid, the ethereal white flower that seemed to float in the air. Leona's heart hammered against her ribs. That flower. It had been their secret. On their 3rd anniversary, he had surprised her with a trip to the Florida Everglades, hiring a private guide to take them deep into the Fakahatchee Strand to see the rare orchids in bloom. He'd called her his beautiful, elusive ghost, the one thing of real untamed beauty in his structured world. He remembered. He had to remember. She needed to leave. Now, before he looked up and saw her. Before that flicker of recognition in his eyes could ignite into a full-blown inferno of awkwardness and pain. She gathered her tools, her movements suddenly clumsy. A small pair of wire cutters slipped from her grasp, clattering onto the marble floor. The sound was sharp, intimate in the cacophony of the ballroom. Stephen's head snapped up. His eyes, no longer distant, locked directly onto hers. And this time he saw her. The transformation on his face was terrifying. Confusion, disbelief, and then a dawning recognition that was so intense it felt like a physical impact. The air crackled between them, a pocket of silence in the roaring ballroom. His lips parted slightly, forming her name without a sound. Leona. Panic seized her. She snatched the cutters from the floor, her cheeks burning with a hot, shameful flush. She gave him a curt, almost imperceptible nod, the nod you give a stranger who holds a door for you, and turned, intending to melt back into the shadows of the service corridor. But it was too late. The ghost was no longer invisible. And on stage, Cassandra Beaumont, smiling benevolently at the adoring crowd, was tapping the microphone. "Good evening, everyone." Her voice boomed silky and confident. "It's so wonderful to see so many generous hearts here tonight supporting the Children's Literacy Fund. When I look around this beautiful room, I'm filled with such a sense of community, of shared values, of a commitment to excellence." Leona kept her back to the stage, walking as quickly as she could without breaking into a run. She could feel Stephen's stare burning into her back, a tangible heat. She just had to make it to the door. 10 more feet, a commitment we see in the fine food, the wonderful music, Cassandra continued. And of course the decor which sets the tone for the entire evening. Leona's hand was on the handle of the service door. She was almost safe. "And while the decor is quaint," Cassandra said, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial purr, "one does wonder if the Starlight Gala has lowered its standards, hiring some unknown small-time florist." The words hit Leona like a spray of icy water. She stopped, her hand frozen on the door. A hush fell over the tables nearest the stage. People were turning, murmuring. "I mean, it's a noble effort, of course." Cassandra went on, the false sympathy in her voice more cutting than any curse. "It's always lovely to give opportunities to up-and-coming amateurs, but for an event of this caliber, one expects a certain level of sophistication. One expects a professional, a somebody, not a nobody trying to play in the big leagues." The humiliation was absolute. It was a targeted public execution. Cassandra hadn't just insulted her work. She had branded her in a room full of potential clients and industry peers as an insignificant amateur. Leona felt the blood drain from her face. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. All she could do was stand there, trapped in the glare of 1,000 eyes, her dream turning to ash in the spotlight's cruel glow. The silence that followed Cassandra's words was heavy and suffocating. It was broken by a few sycophantic titters from her friends at the front table, but mostly there was a palpable sense of discomfort. It was a breach of etiquette, a moment of overt cruelty in a world that preferred its barbs to be veiled and subtle. Leona stood rooted to the spot, her world shrinking to the polished handle of the service door beneath her trembling hand. Every insult she had ever internalized, every fear she had about her own worthlessness after the divorce was now being broadcast to New York's elite. She was a failure. A nobody. Cassandra had just confirmed it for everyone. She wanted to disappear, to turn into smoke and vanish into the ventilation system. Behind her, she heard a chair scrape aggressively against the marble floor. She didn't have to look to know it was Stephen. The laser focus of his attention had shifted from her to the woman on the stage. The air grew thick with a new dangerous energy. On stage, Cassandra, high on her own venom, seemed oblivious. She mistook the shocked silence for rapt attention. "But enough about the little things," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand, preparing to move on to her prepared remarks about charity and compassion. "No," a voice cut through the ballroom, low and resonant with controlled fury. "Let's talk about the little things." Every head turned. Stephen Baker was on his feet. His face, which had been a mask of bored indifference just minutes before, was now alive with a cold, terrifying rage. His knuckles were white where he gripped the back of his chair. He wasn't looking at Cassandra. He was looking directly at the centerpiece on his table, at the ghost orchid. "Let's talk about the designer." Stephen continued, his voice rising easily, carrying across the silent room. He began to walk toward the stage, not with the easy saunter of a billionaire, but with the determined predatory stride of a wolf. The crowd parted for him as if by instinct. Cassandra's perfect smile faltered. This was not part of the script. "Stephen, darling, what are you doing?" she whispered into the mic, her voice suddenly tight with confusion. He didn't answer her. He stopped at the foot of the stage, his eyes still fixed on the flower, as if it held the answer to a question he hadn't known he should be asking for the past 2 years. Leona could see the gears turning in his head, the connections being made. The orchid. Her old mentor, Mr. O'Connell, a world-renowned orchid expert. The lies. The divorce. It was all coalescing, a perfect storm of realization. He finally lifted his head, and his gaze swept the room until it found Leona again, still frozen by the door. His expression was one of agony, of a profound, soul-shaking regret. It was the face of a man who had just realized he'd been tricked into throwing away a diamond, believing it to be a common stone. "The designer of these arrangements," Stephen said, his voice now booming with authority, his eyes never leaving Leona's, "is not an amateur. She is not a nobody." Cassandra's face paled. She took a step back from the microphone, her confidence shattering like cheap glass. "Stephen, stop it. You're making a scene. You want to talk about standards." Stephen ignored her, taking the stairs to the stage in 2 long strides. He walked directly to her, and the contempt in his eyes was so potent that Cassandra physically flinched. He didn't touch her, but he gently took the microphone from her limp hand. Her fingers were slick with sweat. He turned to the audience, his powerful presence commanding the absolute attention of every person in the room. "You want to talk about sophistication, about talent." He began, his voice a raw, emotional tremor. "The artist responsible for the beauty in this room, the only truly authentic thing I've seen all night, is Leona Ashworth." A gasp rippled through the crowd. The name was vaguely familiar to some, the forgotten ex-wife of the man now holding the microphone. The murmurs started, a rising tide of gossip and speculation. Leona's legs gave out. She leaned against the wall for support, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. He had said her name. He was defending her. After 2 years of silence, of being erased, he was speaking her name into existence. "And I should know." Stephen's voice cracked raw with an emotion Leona hadn't heard from him in years. "Because not only is she a brilliant botanical artist, she is also my ex-wife." The ballroom erupted. The murmuring exploded into a roar of shocked whispers. Phones were subtly being raised, cameras flashing discreetly from the darker corners of the room. This was no longer a charity gala. It was the social event of the decade, and it was imploding in real time. Cassandra looked as if she'd been struck by lightning. Her face was a mask of horror and fury. Her perfectly constructed world, her image, her brand, it was all crumbling at her feet. She had tried to humiliate a nobody, and had instead unmasked the long-lost queen, inadvertently orchestrating her own spectacular downfall. "Stephen, how could you?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper that the microphone thankfully didn't catch. He ignored her completely. His eyes were only for Leona. He looked at her with 2 years of unspoken words of regret, of a dawning horrifying understanding. He saw the woman he had loved, the woman he had discarded based on a lie, standing alone, publicly shamed, and working at an event where she was once the guest of honor. Leona knew she should run. This was a nightmare, a public spectacle she wanted no part of. But she was paralyzed, caught in the tractor beam of his gaze. Then he did the last thing she could have ever imagined. He started walking towards her. He stepped off the stage, his gaze never wavering, and moved through the sea of stunned, silent guests. The world seemed to slow down, the noise fading into a dull roar. He walked past the $1,000,000 necklaces and the couture gowns, past the titans of finance and the doyens of society. He walked until he was standing right in front of her, the woman in the simple black dress, the nobody florist. The air between them was thick with the ghosts of their shared past. He smelled the same, a clean, expensive scent of cedarwood and ambition. His gray eyes, now just inches from hers, were filled with a desperate plea. "Leona," he breathed, his voice for her alone. "I am so sorry." And then, under the full glare of the ballroom lights, with hundreds of phones now openly recording, Stephen Baker, the billionaire titan who never showed emotion, cupped her face in his hands, leaned in and kissed her. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was a desperate, frantic collision of regret and longing, a story of 2 years of silence crammed into a single breathtaking moment. It was the taste of expensive whiskey and a profound, soul-deep apology. For a split second, Leona's body betrayed her. She melted into him, her hands instinctively coming up to his chest, remembering the feel of the fine wool of his suit, the solid strength of the man underneath. It was a muscle memory her heart hadn't forgotten, even if her mind had tried to. Then the reality of the situation crashed down on her. The flash of a camera, a bright, intrusive pop, broke the spell. The roar of the crowd came rushing back into her ears. She was being kissed by her ex-husband, the man who had torn her world apart in front of his socialite girlfriend and the entirety of New York's high society. This wasn't a fairy tale moment. It was a public relations disaster, a humiliation of a different, more complicated kind. She pushed him away, her hands flat against his chest. The force was surprisingly strong, and he stumbled back a step, his eyes wide with a mixture of hurt and surprise. "Don't!" She gasped, her voice barely a whisper, but it was as sharp as a slap in the sudden charged silence that had fallen. On the stage, Cassandra Beaumont finally snapped out of her stupor. The image of her boyfriend kissing his ex-wife, broadcast on 100 Instagram live streams, was a public branding she could not endure. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, her carefully cultivated voice now shrill and ugly. She stormed down the steps, her crimson dress flowing behind her like a river of blood. "Stephen, how dare you in front of everyone with her?" She spat the last word as if it were poison, her perfectly manicured finger pointing directly at Leona. The mask of the elegant socialite was gone, replaced by the contorted face of pure, unadulterated fury. Stephen turned to face Cassandra, shielding Leona with his body. The look he gave his girlfriend was one of utter revulsion. "It's over, Cassandra," he said, his voice cold and final. "Get your things out of my house. We're done." Done. She laughed, a high hysterical sound. "You can't be done with me. We're Stephen and Cassandra. We're a brand. You'll be ruined." "I think," Stephen said slowly, his eyes boring into hers with a terrifying intensity, "that I'm finally beginning to understand who has been ruining me all along." His words hung in the air, thick with unspoken accusation. Leona felt a chill run down her spine. He knew, or at least he suspected. The ghost orchid had been the key, The one detail Cassandra couldn't have known, the one thread that when pulled unraveled the entire tapestry of her lies. The memory of their final devastating fight flooded Leona's mind. It had been in his stark minimalist office, the city lights glittering coldly behind him. "It's O'Connell, isn't it?" Stephen had accused, his voice dangerously low. He'd thrown a folder onto his desk. It was filled with photographs. Innocuous photographs. Leona and her mentor at a botanical garden, them sharing a coffee while discussing a rare plant. But they had been framed, captioned by an anonymous source to look like a clandestine affair. "What are you talking about?" she had cried, her heart pounding with confusion and fear. "He's 70 years old, Stephen. He's my friend." "My source is impeccable," he'd said, his face like stone. "They said you've been seeing him for months, that you call him your secret passion. Is that what all this botany nonsense is about, a cover?" "Your source, who would say such a vile thing?" she'd begged, tears streaming down her face. "That doesn't matter," he'd stated, turning away from her, effectively ending the conversation and their marriage. "What matters is that I can't trust you." Now, seeing the look exchanged between Stephen and Cassandra, Leona understood. Cassandra had been the impeccable source. She had known about Leona's passion for orchids, and she had twisted it, weaponized it. But she hadn't known about the Fakahatchee strand. She hadn't known the specific intimate meaning of the ghost orchid. It was the one detail that exposed her. The chaos in the ballroom reached a fever pitch. Security guards were trying to manage the press of people surging forward. Beverly, the coordinator, looked like she was about to have a nervous breakdown. Leona couldn't take it anymore. She was suffocating. She turned and fled, pushing through the service door into the blessed anonymity of the back corridor. The sudden quiet was a relief, but her heart was still jackhammering in her chest. She leaned against the cool, painted cinder-block wall, trying to catch her breath. The door swung open again behind her. It was Stephen. "Leona, wait," he pleaded, his voice ragged. "Leave me alone, Stephen," she said, not turning to face him. "Haven't you done enough damage for one night?" "Damage? I was defending you. Did you hear what she said?" "I heard her," Leona said, finally, turning, her eyes flashing with a pain so deep it looked like anger. "But I also remember what you said, Stephen, 2 years ago. You called me a liar, a cheat. You threw away 8 years of marriage because of an impeccable source who turned out to be the woman you started dating a month after our divorce was finalized. Do you have any idea how that feels?" The color drained from his face. He looked utterly broken. "Leona, I didn't know. I was a fool, an arrogant, blind fool. When I saw that orchid tonight," her words, "it all clicked. She must have been planning it for months, years even, feeding me poison drop by drop." "And you drank every last bit of it?" Leona shot back, her voice trembling with unshed tears. "You never once gave me the benefit of the doubt. You never once trusted me. That's what hurts, Stephen. Not the lies she told, but the fact that you believed them." He took a step towards her, his hands outstretched. "Let me fix this. Let me make it right." "Fix this?" She laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "How by kissing me in front of the entire world and turning my life into a public circus? My business, the one thing I have that's mine, was just getting off the ground. Now I'll forever be known as the nobody florist who got into a public spat with her billionaire ex. You haven't fixed anything. You've just poured gasoline on the fire." She pushed past him, her shoulder brushing his, and started walking down the long, sterile corridor, her sensible heels clicking a frantic rhythm on the linoleum floor. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she had to get away from him, from the ballroom, from the ghost of a love that refused to stay dead. "Leona," he called after her, his voice echoing in the empty hallway. "Don't walk away from me again." The word stopped her cold. Again. As if she had been the one to walk away. She turned slowly, her eyes burning holes into him. "I didn't walk away from you, Stephen," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. You threw me away." She didn't wait for a response. She turned the corner and disappeared, leaving him standing alone in the hallway, the distant roar of the scandal he had created ringing in his ears. The next morning, Leona's name was everywhere. It wasn't on the society pages for her stunning floral designs, but on the salacious front pages of tabloids and gossip sites. Photos of the kiss were splashed across the internet, grainy smartphone images that had gone viral overnight. There were pictures of Cassandra's furious, tear-streaked face, pictures of Stephen's desperate, pleading expression, and pictures of Leona looking terrified and overwhelmed, a deer caught in the blinding headlights of a scandal she never asked for. Billionaire's ballroom brawl. Baker dumps influencer for ex-wife, screamed one headline. From nobody to Notorious the florist who reclaimed her man, read another painting her as some sort of conniving mastermind. Her phone had been ringing since 5 a.m. It buzzed incessantly on her small kitchen table, displaying a dizzying array of unknown numbers, news outlets, and most painfully, Stephen's private line. She ignored them all, letting them go to a voicemail box that was already full. She sat nursing a mug of black coffee, the steam warming her cold hands. Her small Queens apartment felt like a bunker, the only safe place in a city that was suddenly obsessed with her. Her dream of putting Acanthus Designs on the map had come true in the most grotesque way imaginable. She felt used. Stephen's grand gesture, his public defense and apology, hadn't felt like a vindication. It felt like a hostile takeover. He hadn't asked her what she wanted. He had simply acted a king, moving pawns on a chessboard, reclaiming what he'd decided was his. He had turned her private pain into a public spectacle, and in doing so had stolen her narrative all over again. A sharp knock on her apartment door made her jump, sloshing coffee onto the table. "Go away!" she called out, her voice hoarse. "Leona, it's me, Robert." Robert O'Connell. Her mentor, her friend, the 75-year-old man she had supposedly had a torrid affair with. Relief washed over her. He was one of the few people she could bear to see. She unbolted the door to find him standing there, a worried look on his kind, wrinkled face, holding a paper bag that smelled deliciously of fresh croissants. "I thought you might need reinforcements," he said, his blue eyes twinkling despite the gravity of the situation. She burst into tears. He simply stepped inside, wrapped his frail but steady arms around her, and held her as she sobbed. "Oh, my dear girl," he murmured, patting her back. "What a terrible mess." They spent the next hour at her kitchen table. He made her eat a croissant while he calmly scrolled through the news on his tablet, occasionally snorting with derision. "They're painting this Cassandra woman as a victim," he noted with a dry chuckle. "Heartbroken lifestyle guru betrayed by billionaire beau. The public has a remarkably short memory." "It's all my fault," Leona mumbled through a mouthful of pastry. "I should never have taken that job." "Nonsense," Robert said firmly, putting his tablet down. "You did nothing wrong. You created something beautiful, and a jealous, insecure woman tried to tear you down. What happened after that was not of your making. That was Baker's circus." He paused, his expression turning serious. "The question is, what do you do now?" Before she could answer her business phone, a separate line she kept for Acanthus Designs began to ring. She stared at it, expecting another reporter. "Answer it," Robert urged gently. "You can't hide forever. Your business is at stake." Hesitantly, she picked it up. "Acanthus Designs," she said, her voice small. "Is this Leona Ashworth?" a crisp, professional female voice asked. "This is Genevieve Monroe, assistant to Mr. Antoine Dubois." Leona nearly dropped the phone. Antoine Dubois was the event planner in New York City. He handled galas for the Met, weddings, for celebrities, parties, for international royalty. He was the kingmaker. "Yes, this is she," Leona managed to say. "Mr. Dubois was at the Starlight Gala last night." Genevieve continued, her voice warming slightly. "He was incredibly impressed by your work. He said he hasn't seen such innovative and soulful floral artistry in years. He would like to schedule a meeting with you to discuss an exclusive contract for all his events for the upcoming season. Leona was stunned into silence. A contract with Antoine Dubois. It was the kind of break she had only dreamed of. "Ms. Ashworth, are you there?" Yes, I'm here," she stammered. I would be honored." After she hung up, she stared at Robert, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Did that just happen?" He smiled. "It seems that while the tabloids were focused on the drama, the people who matter were focused on your talent. You see, not all publicity is bad publicity." The call was a lifeline, a tiny pinprick of light in the overwhelming darkness. It was a reminder that her work, her art, had a voice of its own. But the storm was far from over. Later that afternoon, a sleek black car, the kind that whispers money, pulled up outside her building. Stephen got out. He was dressed not in a suit but in jeans and a simple gray sweater, an outfit designed to make him look approachable normal. But there was nothing normal about the situation. He bypassed the buzzer, having likely charmed or paid off the building superintendent, and a few moments later there was a knock on her door. Leona's heart leaped into her throat. Robert gave her a supportive look. "You have to face him eventually." She took a deep breath and opened the door. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it all night. He was holding a large manila envelope. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice quiet, stripped of its usual command. She hesitated, then stepped aside. He walked into her small living room, his large frame seeming to shrink the space. He looked around at her world, the shelves overflowing with books on botany, the sketches of floral designs tacked to a corkboard, the simple, comfortable furniture. It was a universe away from the cold architectural perfection of the penthouse they had shared. "You built this," he said softly, more to himself than to her. "A real home." "What do you want, Stephen?" she asked, crossing her arms, creating a physical barrier between them. He held out the envelope. "I wanted to give you this. It's proof." She eyed it suspiciously. "Proof of what?" "Of everything," he said, his voice laced with self-loathing. "I spent all night with my company's digital forensics team. Cassandra was careless. She used one of my old tablets to send the anonymous tips to my lawyer. She hired the photographer to take those pictures of you and O'Connell. It's all in there. Server logs, deleted emails, we recovered bank transfers. It's undeniable proof that she orchestrated the entire thing." Leona stared at the envelope, her mind reeling. Concrete evidence of the lie that had destroyed her life. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked, her voice dangerously steady. "Because I need you to know," he said, his gray eyes pleading with her. "I need you to know that I know. That I see the full scope of my idiocy. There is no excuse for what I did, Leona. None. I was arrogant. I was so consumed with work and paranoia that I couldn't see the truth right in front of me. I broke the most important thing in my life because I listened to a snake instead of my own heart." He placed the envelope on her coffee table. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. I couldn't live another day without you knowing that I finally understand the truth." He looked at her, his soul seemingly laid bare, waiting for a verdict she didn't know how to deliver. The proof was there. The apology was spoken. But the wound was 2 years deep, and she wasn't sure if it had even begun to heal. For 3 days the manila envelope sat on Leona's coffee table like an unexploded bomb. She couldn't bring herself to open it. Part of her didn't need to. Stephen's tortured confession had been proof enough. Another, more frightened part of her knew that reading the cold, hard details of Cassandra's betrayal, the calculated emails, the timed leaks, would make the pain fresh all over again. It would transform the dull ache of the past into a sharp, piercing agony. In the meantime, the world outside her apartment continued its frenzy. Cassandra Beaumont had gone into hiding, deactivating her social media after a disastrous attempt at a public statement where she blamed malicious rumors and the emotional instability of an ex-wife. The statement was torn apart online, and her carefully constructed brand of authentic living crumbled into dust. She was a pariah. Conversely, Acanthus Designs was exploding. The call from Antoine Dubois's office had been followed by a flood of others. Art galleries, luxury hotels, even the mayor's office for an upcoming city function. It was overwhelming, terrifying, and exhilarating. Leona spent her days fielding calls, drawing up proposals, and trying to figure out how she would scale her one-woman operation to meet the sudden insatiable demand. She was no longer Leona the ex-wife or Leona the nobody. She was Leona Ashworth, the hottest floral designer in New York. The vindication was sweet, but it had a bitter aftertaste. This success was born from the ashes of her public humiliation. Stephen, true to his word, didn't push. He didn't call or text, but his presence lingered. Every morning a single perfect flower would be waiting for her outside her apartment door, left by a discreet messenger. There was no card, no grand bouquet, just one stem. The first day it was a branch of white lilac, which in the Victorian language of flowers meant youthful innocence. The second day it was a purple hyacinth, please forgive me. The third day a white tulip, I am not worthy of you. Leona knew immediately they were from him. This was a language they had once shared. Early in their relationship she had given him a book on floriography, the language of flowers. He, the man of data and logic, had been fascinated by it, a secret code hiding in plain sight. He had memorized it and would often leave her a single bloom with a hidden message on her pillow. It was the most romantic, most intimate thing he had ever done. To see him using it now was a calculated, devastatingly effective move. It bypassed her anger and spoke directly to her heart, to the part of her that still remembered the man he used to be. On the fourth day, Robert O'Connell came by to help her sort through a mountain of contracts. He saw the latest flower left on her counter in a small vase. It was a sprig of Star of Bethlehem. "Hope," Robert said quietly, identifying it instantly. He looked from the flower to the untouched manila envelope on the coffee table. "You know, my dear, a wound can't heal if you don't clean it out first." He was right. She was living in limbo, caught between the past she hadn't fully processed and a future she was too scared to embrace. That evening, after Robert left, Leona poured herself a glass of wine, sat on her floor, and finally opened the envelope. It was worse than she could have imagined. There were printouts of emails from Cassandra to a private investigator she'd hired, instructing him to find anything that looks compromising between Leona and Robert. There were text messages to Stephen full of feigned concern. "I don't want to worry you, Gray, but I saw Leona with that older professor again. They look so intimate. I just worry she's not happy." It was a campaign of psychological warfare waged over months. The most damning piece of evidence was a recovered audio file, a voicemail Cassandra had inadvertently recorded and deleted. In it she was talking to a friend, laughing. "He's so easy to manipulate," Cassandra's voice said, dripping with contempt. "All you have to do is question his control, suggest something is happening behind his back. His ego does the rest. By the time I'm done, he'll be begging me to help him pick up the pieces." Leona felt a wave of nausea. She had been a casualty in Cassandra's twisted game to win Stephen. But that didn't absolve him. He had been the gun she had used to shoot Leona's happiness. His ego, his paranoia, his refusal to trust, that had been the ammunition. The final piece of paper in the envelope was not a legal document. It was a handwritten letter on Stephen's personal stationery. "Leona, if you are reading this, it means you have seen the proof of my failure. I have included it not to excuse my actions, but to give you the full truth you were always denied. I live with that failure every second of every day. The silence in the penthouse is a constant reminder of the life and laughter that I drove out of it. I know my apology at the gala was a selfish public act. I reacted without thinking of the consequences for you, and I'm sorry for that. I saw you being hurt, and my only instinct was to burn down the person who was hurting you. I didn't stop to think that you would be caught in the fire. The flowers are the only way I know how to speak to you right now. They are the only language I have left that I haven't poisoned with lies and doubt. I don't expect you to reply. I don't expect anything. I just need you to know that in a world of numbers and code, you were the only real thing, and I was too stupid to see it until you were gone. Yours always, Stephen. Tears streamed down her face, dripping onto the crisp paper. They weren't tears of sadness, but of a wrenching, painful release. The truth in all its ugliness was finally out. The lies were dead and buried. She picked up her phone, her fingers hovering over Stephen's name. What now? A part of her wanted to call him, to scream at him, to rage and weep, and demand an accounting for her 2 lost years. Another part wanted to delete his number and never look back, to build her new life on the foundation of her own strength. Instead, she did something else. She walked to her workbench where her tools and supplies were laid out. She took a single perfect gardenia, "You are lovely," and a stem of ivy, "Fidelity wedded love." She wrapped their stems together with a simple black ribbon. She walked downstairs and hailed a taxi. "Baker Tower, please." The driver's eyes widened in the rearview mirror as he recognized her from the news, but he said nothing. As the cab sped through the glittering streets of Manhattan, Leona held the small bouquet in her lap. She didn't know if this was an act of forgiveness or an act of farewell. Perhaps it was both. She was no longer a victim of his story. She was going to write her own ending. The lobby of Baker Tower was a cathedral of glass and steel, a monument to Stephen's ambition. It was designed to intimidate, to make visitors feel small. 2 years ago, Leona used to walk through it feeling like an imposter. Tonight she walked with her head held high, the simple bouquet in her hand, her only armor. The security guard at the front desk, a man named Frank, who had always been kind to her, did a double-take. Ms. Ashworth," he corrected himself, fumbling. "It's good to see you." "You too, Frank." She smiled a genuine small smile. "Is he in his office?" "Yes, ma'am. He's been working late every night. Should I call up?" "No, thank you. I'll surprise him." The private elevator whisked her up to the penthouse floor in a silent, stomach-lurching ascent. When the doors opened, she stepped not into an office, but into the vast open-plan living space of the apartment they had once shared. It was just as she remembered it, minimalist, impeccably clean, and achingly lonely. The sweeping views of the city skyline glittered like a carpet of scattered diamonds. Stephen was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to her, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He was staring out at the city, but he wasn't seeing it. "I told you I didn't want to be disturbed, Helen," he said, his voice weary, mistaking her for his housekeeper. "She let me come up," Leona said softly. He flinched as if he'd received an electric shock. He turned around slowly, his face a canvas of disbelief and fragile hope. Seeing her standing there in his home was clearly something he had thought would never happen again. "Leona," he breathed. She didn't say anything. She walked towards him, her footsteps echoing faintly on the polished marble floor. She stopped a few feet away and held out the small bouquet of the gardenia and ivy. He stared at it, his eyes tracing the shapes of the flowers. He understood the message instantly. His throat worked, and for a moment Leona thought he might cry. He gently took the flowers from her, his fingers brushing against hers. The brief touch sent a familiar spark through her veins. "Does this mean—" He started, his voice thick with emotion. "Does this mean you forgive me?" Leona took a deep breath. This was the moment. The culmination of everything. "No," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Forgiveness is a simple word for a very complicated thing, Stephen. I don't know if I'm there yet. I might never be. The scar you left is deep." His face fell, the hope in his eyes dimming. "But," she continued, meeting his gaze without flinching, "I'm willing to see if the soil is fertile enough for something new to grow. I'm not the same woman you married, Stephen, and you can't be the same man who let me go." He nodded, absorbing her words. "I'm not," he said earnestly. "These last 2 years, and especially these last few days, I've seen myself through your eyes. And I don't like the man I was. He was arrogant, insecure, and a coward. He let his pride matter more than his heart. I'm done being that man. Prove it, she challenged, her voice soft but firm. Words are easy. You sent me flowers with messages. But real communication, real trust, that's built day by day. It's not a grand gesture in a ballroom. It's a quiet conversation on a Tuesday night. It's listening. It's believing in someone without needing a folder full of proof. She gestured around the vast, empty apartment. This place, it was never a home. It was a showroom. Your showroom. I was just one of the exhibits. I have my own life now, Stephen. My own business. My own home. I will not be a nobody ever again, and I will not be absorbed into your world. He stepped closer, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Then let me be a part of yours, he pleaded. Let me come to Queens. Let me get dirt under my fingernails. Let me help you carry boxes from the flower market at dawn. Let me earn a place in your life, Leona. Not as Stephen Baker the billionaire, but as Stephen the man who loves you more than his own life and was a catastrophic fool to ever let you go. Leona looked at him, truly looked at him. The Titan was gone. In his place was a man humbled and broken, asking for a chance to rebuild, not what they had, but something entirely new. The anger in her heart, which had burned for so long, had cooled to embers. In its place was a tiny, fragile seedling of hope. The same hope represented by the Star of Bethlehem he had left for her. She didn't give him an answer with words. Instead, she gave him a small, hesitant nod. It was enough. It wasn't a Hollywood ending. It wasn't a passionate kiss and a promise of forever. It was something far more real and far more precious. It was a beginning. A chance to cultivate a new garden from the ruins of the old, seed by seed, day by day under the quiet, patient gaze of the sun. The spotlight had been turned off, and in the gentle, authentic light that remained, they could finally start to see each other clearly. Leona Ashworth's story isn't just about a dramatic kiss or a billionaire's apology. It's about the quiet strength it takes to rebuild a life from scratch, to find your own worth when the world and the person you loved most has labeled you a nobody. She walked into that gala as a florist and walked out as the master of her own destiny. The journey from heartbreak to empowerment is never easy, but Leona shows us that true value isn't measured in wealth or status, but in talent, resilience, and the courage to define yourself. What would you have done in her shoes? Could you ever trust the man who broke you so completely, even if his apology was public and his regret was real? If her incredible story of strength and second chances moved you, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own worth, and don't forget to subscribe for more true life dramas that will touch your heart. Comment below with your thoughts on Leona's decision. We'd love to hear from you.